Hello, scholars. This is Mr. Myers. We're going to do 2.6 Powers and Limits of the President. Make sure you take good structured notes over our objectives. We're going to be looking at various powers, the executive powers, obviously, but a whole host of other powers on the presidency: legislative, diplomatic, military, judicial. And then we'll end by talking about the limits on the powers of the president. So we'll begin with the basics of the executive. Now, it's important to note that the president wears many hats, and the first hat that the president wears is as chief executive. And the president is largely charged with enforcing or executing the law. And one simple way to remember the three branches of government is the legislative branch makes laws, the executive branch executes or enforces the laws, and the judicial branch judges the laws. The executive is also made up of the federal agencies and the U.S. military and U.S. diplomats overseas, collectively kind of known as the bureaucracy. One of the basic executive powers that the president has is the power of appointment. And basically what this means is that agency heads, for example, the head of the EPA, the head of cabinet agencies like the Department of State and the Department of the Treasury, as well as judges, the president has the power to appoint those officials. Most of the time the Senate has to confirm those officials. There are also things called executive orders, and the president can sometimes direct executive agencies to carry out his or her wishes through executive orders. Executive orders have the force of law and can be a very important tool for the president, especially if he or she is dealing with a gridlocked Congress who's unable to pass legislation on important issues. There's obviously a narrow scope within which executive orders can operate, and they can be declared unconstitutional just like laws can be declared unconstitutional. Okay, let's put on hat number 2 for the president, the legislative powers hat. Now, the most important legislative power that the president has, and I didn't even put this on the slide, so make sure you write it down, is signing bills into law. So that's kind of a duh. But in addition to that, he also has the power of veto. The president can veto bills that pass through Congress. The president also is supposed to issue budget proposals. And the budget proposals sometimes are thrown away by the Congress, and the Congress will write their own. But usually a budget is delivered by the president, which outlines the policy initiatives in the areas of emphasis that the president would like to focus monies and attention on. In addition, the president is required by the Constitution to deliver an address in front of Congress once a year on the State of the Union. And of course, the State of the Union address is a very kind of formal ceremonial job where the president gets up and talks about how awesome America is and how great they're doing in office. Okay, in terms of diplomatic powers, the president is the chief diplomat, and they have the power to negotiate treaties with foreign powers. Those could be economic treaties like NAFTA, those could be military treaties like NATO, and of course those treaties would have to go back and be proposed to the Senate, and the Senate would have to approve those treaties. The chief diplomat also has the power to recognize foreign governments. That's an important diplomatic tool. For example, the United States was the first country to recognize the State of Israel when it declared its independence. The United States also famously normalized relations with China when Nixon visited Mao in 1972. That was a pretty historic event, and it's a big deal when the United States basically says to another country, you are a sovereign entity that is equal in terms of recognition and rights on the world stage as any other country. Lastly, the chief diplomat has the power to appoint ambassadors to other countries and then to receive ambassadors from other countries. Ambassadors are supposed to represent the wishes of their own country, and sending and receiving ambassadors are an important way in which countries communicate with each other. One of the most important hats that the president wears is Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. military. This is important for a couple reasons. First of all, a civilian is actually in charge of the U.S. military. In addition, the U.S. military is by far the most powerful military in the world. The President of the United States is charged with protecting the country from enemies both foreign and domestic, and this places an enormous burden on the President. The President has enormous amounts of power available to him or her, can launch nuclear weapons at his or her discretion, and obviously guarding the United States and defending the United States is one of the most important things the President can do. In addition, all the major officer positions within the military, major generals and lieutenants and things like that, all have to be appointed by presidents. The president also has judicial powers. We've already talked about the importance of appointing judges, and of course, those judges would have to be approved by the Senate. Another important judicial power that the president has is the power to pardon. The president can unilaterally pardon people, and this happens pretty much with every presidency towards the end of the presidency when cases get brought to the attention of White House staff or the president of, sentences that were way too long, or someone's civil rights were abused, or someone had been in prison for 40 or 50 years and had good behavior and are still being denied parole. There's usually a handful of those kinds of cases where the president can issue pardons. And of course, the most important pardon of all every year, the president pardons a turkey in the Rose Garden, and that turkey gets to live another day. Now, a little addition here. It's worth noting that Biden and Trump have done things with pardons that presidents historically haven't done. At the end of Biden's administration, he gave a blanket pardon to his son Hunter, and many Democrats rightly criticized him for doing that. His rationale was that Trump was going to go after his family, so he had to do that to protect his son. Meanwhile, Trump comes into office and pardons, in one mass pardon, all of the January 6th rioters that were in the Capitol. You see a little headline here about 1,500 people were ultimately pardoned, including people who were responsible for killing police officers. So, is Trump unique in his view of executive power? I would argue yes. We've had presidents throughout history that have greatly expanded the office and its power. Trump is trying to do that as well. You can see several graphics here regarding executive orders. The top right one shows that Trump has issued more executive orders than any other president since World War II. You also see on the bottom right the roadblocks, the lawsuits that are being waged against the administration trying to prevent some of those changes. Trump certainly is wanting to expand executive power. Republicans seem to be 100% in support of this. And it kind of begs the question, what's going to happen when a Democrat comes into office? Will that person, he or she, retain those powers that Trump is trying to kind of claim, or will it kind of go back to normal? Whether that's drafting tariff policy, which is normally the purview of the legislative branch, or issuing huge numbers of executive orders, Trump clearly wants to expand the power of the presidency. So we've talked about a lot of different hats that the president wears. There are limits on the power of the president, but before I go over those, it's important to note that the powers of the presidency have grown substantially over time. In fact, some historians have labeled the modern presidency the imperial presidency, especially in the age of the Cold War and nuclear weapons. The power that the president has in waging war without a declaration of war and shaping world affairs has grown and grown and grown. Some people liken the presidency to a baseball glove, and every time you put the glove on, if your hand is bigger, the glove stretches, but the glove never kind of goes back or shrinks again, right? So every time there's an expansion of executive power, that power tends to remain. So, all of that being said, the Supreme Court can declare executive acts unconstitutional. That does happen. Most of the time, the president listens to the Supreme Court. Every once in a while, he'll go rogue, like Andrew Jackson did in the famous Worcester v. Georgia case, when he famously said of the Chief Justice, Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. And then, of course, Jackson went on and completely ignored the ruling of the Supreme Court. But for the most part, presidents listen to the Supreme Court. Congress can override vetoes, presidential vetoes, but that is relatively rare. It requires two-thirds of vote in both houses of Congress to override a veto. Doesn't usually happen. Congress can ignore budget proposals. However, if there are popular initiatives within those budget proposals, it's often hard for Congress to completely ignore those. The Senate can reject nominees for appointed positions. That is certainly true. However, the president still has the power of appointment, right? So even if the Senate rejects 5 or 10, judges in a row, that still has to be filled. And one way the president can get around that is by appointing an interim, and oftentimes the interims, which are temporary, placeholders, can often have as much power as the actual head officials themselves. The Senate can reject treaties, but that doesn't happen very often. Treaties don't happen very often, actually, so if one is being negotiated, it's probably likely that there's support behind it. And Congress controls spending on federal agencies and the military. The commander-in-chief can send, troops anywhere in the world, but remember that Congress has the power of the purse and ultimately can pull funding for that, so it's kind of hard to wage a war if there's no money to support it. I hope you enjoyed learning about the various hats the president wears and bring any questions to class.